we deal with, as most investment advisors do, we deal with people who are successful and they're smart people. And as you alluded to, they see that advisors are aging. And if it's a smaller size company, which certainly PlanCorp was at that time, it's a natural question to ask, who's going to take care of my finances? Who's going to be here for the long term when something happens to you, whether that's retirement or something unforeseen?
Welcome to the Kick It Open podcast, where we bring you compelling stories from the wealth management industry and insights on achieving personal success. I'm your host, Shelby Nicholl. Today's guest is Chris Kerckhoff, President and CEO of PlanCorp. PlanCorp is a powerhouse RIA managing about $7 billion in assets and serving clients across the country from their hubs in St. Louis, Nashville, Boca Raton, Sarasota, and San Fran. Our guest, Chris, joined the firm way back in 1997 as employee number 5, so he literally grew up alongside the company. In 2010, he became an owner and was named president, and he was one of the youngest people in the country leading an RIA with over $1 billion in AUM. And if that wasn't enough, the original partners handed him the challenge of designing and executing a multi-year succession plan to usher in that Gen 2 of leadership, of which he was a member. So when I started planning an episode on succession planning, there was really no one else I'd rather have on the conversation than Chris. So Chris, welcome to the pod.
Thanks so much, Shelby. I'm really excited to be here. And as you know, we've spoken, I'm very passionate on the subject of succession.
Well, and it's one that is such a topic right now in the industry. We're seeing a lot of transition from Gen 1 to Gen 2. We're seeing some transitions even in how do you create durable succession planning. Before we go there, tell us about your journey in wealth management. And I shared a little bit of it, but I know you have your story.
Sure, thanks. It starts really with, I got a phone call when I was 13 years old from my dad. And I'm old enough that, when I was 13, you didn't get a phone call from your parents very often. We didn't have cell phones. And, outside of, the odd call to come home from a friend's house, no one called, to talk to their kids, generally speaking. But my dad called me. I was actually visiting a friend on the East Coast, and he called and asked to speak to me. And he let me know that the company that our family had owned for over 100 years was being sold. And that shocked me. I kind of grew up thinking I'd go into the family business, which was a dairy business. And it really got me thinking and asking the question, why does a successful company owned by a family, why does it get sold? I knew my dad didn't really want to sell the company. I knew my grandfather didn't really want to sell the company. But there were other family members involved. And so it really got me focused and passionate about this idea of private businesses and why they get sold, what those decisions look like, what are the externalities that can come into play there. So that led me into the wealth management space at a pretty young age.
It's super interesting because given all of the private equity money and the minority investment shares we're seeing, even in services, home services business, HVAC companies and things like that, it's fascinating. Your family was experiencing something somewhat similar even at such a time ago.
Yeah, back in 1989. And that was a consolidation in their industry. It was kind of unique, no private equity involved. But from there, then I went on to business school. And as I was coming out of business school, I was fortunate to meet Jeff Buckner. And Jeff was kind enough to spend the better part of a day with me talking about his approach to wealth management, which was very unique at the time. It was a fee-only, focused on financial planning first, and then really evidence-based investing, which was just starting to get a little bit of traction at that time. So out of all the folks that I talked to, and I spoke to many of the big investment firms and bank and trust companies at the time, Jeff was the only one who sounded like my finance professors, talking about how markets were efficient and that you could engineer a portfolio to produce more reliable opportunity to produce higher rates of return over time without trying to pick stocks and time the markets, which the academics at that time in the mid to late 90s were starting to really have data to show that didn't work. So again, I was fortunate enough that Jeff was looking for someone right as I graduated, and I became the 5th employee at the company. So We were about 185 million at the time, and it was a great opportunity to join a very small firm and really get my hands dirty and learn the industry from the ground up.
Oh, absolutely. And you've said that PlanCorp's, kind of exponential growth, right? 185 million back then to well over 7 billion today is really due to that ability to kind of marry the wisdom of somebody like Jeff with the next generation and all of the employees that you have now. Tell us a little bit more about PlanCorp's journey.
One of the first things that happened in my early years at PlanCorp, was Jeff attracted some other great talented people, his contemporaries, to join the firm. So Steve Frank and Larry LeGrand, Steve was an attorney by background, Larry's a CPA, joined Jeff, and that really kicked off quite a bit of growth for the firm as well. And it was a few years after Jeff brought on Larry and Steve that they started looking at what a succession plan looked like. And these were the early days of some of the solutions that were looking to roll up firms in our industry and the first kind of consolidators that were out there. So, it was when Focus Financial started. Mark Hurley was out there talking to folks about a roll-up strategy that he had. So we talked to a number of companies, and Jeff, Steve, and Larry came to the decision that they really wanted to have an internal succession plan and give PlanCorp an opportunity to grow on its own for the long term. And I give a ton of credit to all three of them. We talk about wisdom, the wisdom that they had to focus on the governance side of succession, which I think is often the part of succession that is overlooked so easily. People focus on leadership succession or ownership succession. They're not real focused on the governance side of things. But we spent a lot of time on all three areas, and that really allowed for a more durable strategy that has held up over the long term. And once we announced that succession plan to our clients, we saw a big surge in client referrals, and we really started then seeing a big alignment across the firm, including across younger advisors, to start bringing business in alongside Jeff, Steve, and Larry. So yeah, it definitely has been a key part of our journey and our success story here.
Yeah, I'd love to dial in a little bit more on that client aspect, because I think one of the things I see or hear is trying to delay the conversation about succession. So we've got let's even say a smaller firm, few people similar in size to where you started and, to the PlanCorp when you started. You've got clients that have been working with the senior advisor for quite a long time. And obviously they're noticing that the senior advisor is getting near retirement. That has to be known, right? And so, but I still hear this like, well, we want to work with them for a year before we even tell them that we are maybe going to take over the business. What do you think about that? Because it sounds like it was actually, by recognizing it up front, it was actually powerful for clients.
It was. Look, we deal with, as most investment advisors do, we deal with people who are successful, and they're smart people. And as you alluded to, they see that advisors are aging, and if it's a smaller size company, which certainly PlanCorp was at that time, it's a natural question to ask, who's going to take care of my finances? Who's going to be here for the long term when something happens to you, whether that's retirement or something unforeseen? So there's definitely a hesitation there, I think, I would say in many cases, to put a client's full portfolio with that advisor. And then also, I think a little bit of a reluctance to refer more people to that person, because you're putting your reputation at risk in terms of what happens if a transition doesn't go well in the future. And if the future looks like that's, less than 10 years out, depending on the age of the advisor, that's a concerning aspect for a client to make a referral. So, clients it was a resounding positive response from clients from our perspective in terms of them hearing that, number one, Jeff, Steve, and Larry recognized that they needed to address this. And number two, that it was going to be an internal succession plan to part of the team that they already knew and that they would get to know as we continued to hire good, young, talented people.
That's great. You mentioned a few aspects to succession planning, the leadership succession and the equity ownership piece, and then governance. And when you say governance, what do you mean? And you mentioned that people are maybe overlooking that item.
I mean, governance can just be as simple as who's making the decision, really, who has authority to make different decisions over the business. So it can be very, very complex too. I mean, certainly over time, as companies grow, oftentimes governance structures and the legal documents that provide for those governance structures can get fairly complex. But it really just starts out, if you've got more than one owner, you have some questions as to who has the right to weigh in on major decisions. The easy one being, if the firm wants to be sold, if the majority owner wants to sell the firm, is that completely within their control? Or do the other shareholders get a say in that? And if they get a say, is it according to the percentage of the company that they own? Is it some other structure? I've seen it really set up a number of different ways. There's no right or wrong in terms of governance decisions. It's really about what's the goal that you're trying to achieve, and then trying to put in place a framework so that the people running the firm and making decisions, first of all, you know who's making the decisions, and it's clear upfront before those big decisions come up. Because let's be honest, once a difficult decision or a decision with a lot of weight comes forward, it's much, much more difficult to have that decision of who has the legal right to make that decision, right? You want that decided ahead of time. So it's about who has those rights. And then also, it's also protection in the event that something happens to any of the shareholders. These firms even smaller firms have become very valuable. And oftentimes they're one of, if not the largest asset of the advisor's net worth. So it's important to their families what happens to their shares. What does that look like if something occurs, unfortunately, if they have an untimely death, if they become disabled. These are all decisions that should end up in a shareholder agreement, an operating agreement, depending on the structure of the firm itself.
You've set the original kind of Gen 1 to Gen 2 transition was probably, 15-ish years ago?
Yeah, we started that in mid-2010.
Okay. And are you finding it to have been durable still, or what does it look like next?
Well, succession is a journey, at least certainly for PlanCorp it is. So there's no set destination. It has been durable, I will say. I was just talking the other day at an event, really giving a ton of credit to Steve Frank in particular, but also Jeff Buckner and Larry LeGrand. The framework that they put in place from an overarching perspective back in 2010 with our operating agreement really allowed for a lot of flexibility and durability in terms of the path of succession and what would have to happen in the future. And I would say the number one thing that it started to give support to is this idea that the firm was going to evolve beyond a partnership, which is really how they operated. The three of them operated like a partnership. And it was going to move more towards a structure where you're going to have multiple shareholders. They knew, and I was involved in those discussions, that we were going to need a multiple of 4 shareholders, 5. We were going to need many shareholders to make this work as the firm continued to grow. And we wanted that because it drives alignment. So we had a framework that really provided a lot of flexibility for that. It also provided flexibility if we wanted to do an acquisition in the future. So there was a lot of foresight put into it, but you can't think of everything, right? So I would tell you, gosh, without getting into too much inside baseball, I bet we've amended the operating agreement, 6 or 7 times in that 14-year period. Some are pretty minor updates. Others are more significant. But it's always good to take a fresh look and to have a good attorney that makes sure that you're thinking of the different ways that the changes to the business should at least generate a new discussion on some of the key points inside your governance structure.
That's great to have that kind of collaboration with that attorney. As you think about the governance side, so the decision making is set through the governance, and then that governance group is able to say yes or no to these various amendments.
Yes, and I mean in our case, we've kept it reasonably simple. So the board at PlanCorp does have some decision rights, but most of the decision rights and certainly the day-to-day running of the company is granted to the CEO and the leadership team at PlanCorp. So That's the group that runs the company day to day. The board is really truly there for pure oversight, and then has to weigh in on major decisions like acquisitions, or if there was ever an offer to sell PlanCorp. Again, PlanCorp's not for sale. I just want to be clear to that. But those are decisions, also shareholder decisions on who we're going to offer new shares of the company to, when we're going to offer those shares. Those are decisions that rest at the board level.
At the board. And does your board, does it operate, much like a public company board, in that you've got outside shareholders or outside experts on there as well? Kind of what does that structure look like?
I don't know if I would say it operates like a public company, but we do have, we have 7 seats on the board. 5 of those seats are filled by outside directors. So 2 of them represent minority shareholders in PlanCorp. And then the others are key folks that have different experience and background that really gives tremendous value to the company in terms of the way they view things, some of the strategic conversations that they can weigh in on, not just at board meetings, but in between board meetings. They're very, very helpful in helping us, kind of think through different strategies in different areas where they have expertise.
I think that outside perspective is so important, right? It's really easy to get into a corporate echo chamber or a personal echo chamber. Definitely saw that at many of the firms that I was at. So as you guys think now about kind of the leadership side, so we talked about governance, how do you separate governance from leadership, and how are you creating durable kind of leadership inside of PlanCorp?
The day-to-day management of the firm is completely owned by the leadership team. And the way we think about leaders is it's our job to continue to develop and grow future leaders for the firm. So if we think about someone who starts here at a young age, we have a number of different career paths that can be followed, but one of those is to continue to gain and take on more responsibility for managing projects, for managing people, for managing teams. And as you see how people lead in those instances and see how they shine and also what their interests are. For some people, they might be naturally good at that, but then that may not be where they see themselves going in their career. That's perfectly fine. We have a number of very talented people who could go in a couple different directions, whether it's leadership or continuing to work directly with clients. So we spend a lot of time with our people understanding where they would like to go, and that can certainly change throughout their career. But more than anything, we just recognize that it's our job to continue to nurture that leadership. We have ongoing development from an internal perspective that includes mentorship and then more formal training and development around that. And then we're big fans of helping people find great coaching, external coaching that can help them develop as leaders as well. Certainly it was something that has been very helpful to me and continues to be helpful to me in my career. And so I'm a big believer that everyone can benefit if you find the right coach.
Well, I think that's really interesting, especially given your early days. You became president really in a kind of quick way, if you will. Mm-hmm. Tell a little bit about that story, and then how you readied yourself to serve as the president of PlanCorp.
The short version of the story is, when I bought into the company in 2010, Jeff, Steve, and Larry thought I was ready to take over as leader of the firm. And so that was a pretty short conversation because I was certainly excited to do that and excited at that opportunity, but quickly realized, literally the next day I was like walking in, I no longer reported to the 3 of them. I now reported to all 25 team members that worked at PlanCorp. It was my job to kind of report to them and work for their benefit. And so once, that next day I realized I needed some help in this. And so I sought out some coaching and guidance from 2 people one of whom was in the industry and one of whom was just a professional management coach. Both of those individuals were invaluable to me in the early days. And one actually sits on our board today, Spencer Siegel. He's still a good friend and a wonderful mentor to me and now a great board member.
Tell me, how did you decide what you needed coaching in? I think this is something I see a lot of advisors and really business owners struggling with, right? And especially as they go through kind of these natural S curves in those growth, right? If you think back maybe 10 years ago, we were all talking about the S curves of growth, but there's a big jump, as you go up AUM. When you get over that $1 billion mark, there's a jump. When you get over the $5 billion mark, there's a jump. As you probably continue to expand, there's going to be additional jumps. How have you self-evaluated and then found the right support?
Shelby, that's a great question. And, I firmly believe there's so much that I don't know that I'm really open to anyone kind of pointing that out. So kind of that Johari window of like, hey, I don't know that I don't know it. And so if there's something you see, please let me know. And so the early days of coaching, I did much more listening than I did anything else because there was so much I didn't know. But I will also quickly add, I feel like a big benefit to me has been decades worth of peer-to-peer interaction across the industry. So PlanCorp was a founding member of Zero Alpha Group. And in Zero Alpha Group, which Jeff was kind enough to allow me to attend many, if not most of their meetings in those early days, there was a lot of peer-to-peer sharing. And so I was exposed to different firms and different ways of thinking about leadership and recognized that there were styles that they resonated with me, but I didn't know how to get there, right? So I knew it helped me identify what I liked and what I was aspiring to grow into. And that really helped me then, as I was talking to various coaches, be specific around where I wanted to get to and see if they could help me get there. And then I would say as time has gone on, the coaching evolves, right? So I mentioned Spencer, who's, been fantastic, but I've also, I've moved on to additional coaches over time, who can help me grow to the next rung in the ladder, if you will. I mean, I don't think of it really, it's really grow into the next skill set that I need, and help me, lean into that next area of strength that I want to get better at. And so that's how I think about coaching. Is it's something you should assess on a regular basis, because oftentimes, the coach that gets you from A to C is not going to be the same coach that gets you from C to H. I don't know, pick a letter. But, so I think you just have to constantly be reassessing where you want to go next and how you want to continue to improve, and think about who's the best person that can help you address that need.
One of the things I talk with a lot of corporate women about, because when I was in the corporates, I had an executive coach and did a kind of 6 or 8 month type of, almost like a peanut butter approach to coaching. It was like, let's talk about productivity. Let's talk about team leadership. Let's talk about how do you find your, sort of your bliss and the things that make you happiest, and evaluating your next role, et cetera. How do you negotiate harder? All those things. And it was very peanut butter. It was very good, but it was very peanut butter. And now I definitely tell people, yes, you can do that. And that's a nice first step. But to your point, like really diving in on, if it's being an inspiring leader and being able to stand in a performance hall, if you will, or a big auditorium almost as a performer, on stage and inspiring, people to do X, Y, Z, that's a skill set. And you can go get coaching just on that.
It is. It's also, the skill set, I don't mind saying the skill set I'm working on right now is how do I lean into really developing and empowering the next generation of leadership? That's something, I feel like I've always been interested in doing that. And I've been fortunate that some of that has happened, by recruiting great people and certainly trusting them to make decisions. But it's, as you get bigger, the stakes get higher and you have to be more intentional about this. And so that's an area that I'm focused on right now, because it requires some intentionality. And even if somebody's good at it, you can always improve in that area, because those are those interpersonal skills. And, it's something that I think certainly has benefited me over the last 12 to 16 months that I've been working on that. So that's my current focus, which is something vastly different than what I was focused on back in 2010 when I was, I like your term, like just trying to get the basics, the peanut butter down. Like I needed that general management coach that could help me just understand what I was supposed to be doing,
I think it's really wise to look at that next generation. And Although I definitely look at it for myself and I'm like, when did I become the one that needed the coaching from that next generation? I used to be the next generation giving that, right? And suddenly I'm on the other side of the table. So happens to all of us, I guess.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
That's the goal. That's the goal, right?
It is.
It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. And my family lives a long time. So we live to be 100 plus pretty regularly. So I'll have a lot of generations ahead of me to learn from.
Good for you.
Hey everyone, Shelby here. Have you ever had a great conversation with a colleague or girlfriend and you leave with an energy boost of inspiration, ready to fight another day? If you're a woman in wealth management, you know that this industry is pretty male dominated. And you also hopefully have experienced the great energy received from gathering with other women. And that feeling was the inspiration for Muriel Network, a digital community for women in wealth management. Learn more at murielnetwork.com. MURIEL network.com. One of the things too, you mentioned it a little bit earlier with your board. You know, we do see a lot of practices, a lot of firms taking minority investments, often as they are wanting to achieve a certain scale up in their growth plan and, do M&A, et cetera. Any watch outs or kind of maybe must do's as you think about minority investments? I know there's a lot to unpack there.
I'm a big believer that anyone who's starting to think about succession or think about long-term planning for their firm from an ownership and leadership governance perspective, if you can carve out some time to have conversations with acquirers, whether it's industry roll-up companies, so firms that are out there just acquiring firms left and right, but also some of the private equity folks who are interested in making minority investments. I would encourage people to have some of those conversations, even if they have zero real intent of, or they think they have zero intent of actually doing any kind of transaction, because you're going to learn so much through those conversations. And I would say the number one thing you'll find out is whether or not you actually are interested or not. It's easy to say you're not interested when you don't know what you don't know, right? Mm-hmm. So you will learn more about the industry through those conversations. You'll learn more about your firm through those conversations, and you'll learn more about how you feel about the industry and your firm through those conversations. And the great news is today, there's no shortage of folks to talk to. And I think, step one would be getting really clear on what your goals are as an organization and as a leader, and include as many of your kind of key people as you're comfortable doing. And I'm not saying just shareholders. I mean, I was fortunate enough that I didn't own any shares in PlanCorp, and I was 25 years old. And Jeff, Steve, and Larry included me in those conversations because they had identified me as a potential future leader. So they wanted my thoughts in that process. Did I have a vote of any sort? No, not at all. And that was clear. But they wanted to consult me in that process. So I feel very fortunate I was involved in those because it certainly helped me get a better understanding of the industry and my understanding of kind of what PlanCorp was trying to achieve. So once you've got that kind of down and then also thought about, okay, if I was going to do a transaction, what are the non-negotiables? What are the things, before I've talked to anybody, what are the things I would not do, I would not accept? And make sure you write those down and you kind of put them somewhere where you can reference them often, and then go out and have some conversations. And if you don't know who to talk to, give me a call. I'm happy to make some introductions. Give other industry folks that you might know, ask them the question, who should I talk to if I'm looking at it? You can come up with some really good quality names in a hurry who are happy to have those conversations. And look, they're going to try and sell you on a deal. Just be clear. But that's okay, I think, because the number one thing that I find people are putting their head in the sand in our industry about is the value of these firms. These firms have become valuable. And it's all relative, right? I mean, the size of the firm matters. Your organic growth rate matters. What you've invested in the firm from a technology, systems, processes, talent. All those things matter. It's not a simple formula today, but it's an easily discoverable value that you can come up with on your firm. And it's important, I think, for people to know that. For one thing, it's important to know if you want to drive value, whether you're looking to sell or not, to think about this as a diagnostic exam for your business. You get to understand, okay, I've been reading about these multiples, but you guys are talking to me about much lower multiples. What's this about? Like, they'll come back, they'll tell you, well, yeah, I mean, this is great, except, your margins are too low. We see that you're several generations behind in your technology. You don't seem to have a great technology strategy. We're concerned about compliance, whatever it is, they're going to tell you very directly what could be the issues that would reduce your value. And then as a business leader, you can choose to work on those things. Again, for a sale necessarily, but just to have a better business going forward. Because look, eventually all businesses, if they're successful, will sell. You're either going to sell internally or you're going to sell externally. One of the two, but that they're going to be sold. Everybody, moves on at some point, and that ownership has to move as well. Maybe not even at retirement, depending on the objective of the firm. But at some point, families will have to monetize shares in these businesses. And so thinking about what that looks like well ahead of time, and then exploring what your options are in terms of external third parties, I think is really, really valuable.
I do see vast differences between how advisors and practice owners think about it, right? If you're a solopreneur, solo advisor, small team, you're going to think about it in a certain way. You're going to be thinking about the succession of your clients to somebody that you trust, definitely getting some payout at some point as you go into retirement, et cetera. If you are building a small firm and a boutique, you're thinking about it a different way. And then if you've gone to a corporation, right, as PlanCorp has, that's a different level of seriousness. It's a different level of durability there too. Yeah. But to your point, everybody has to sell out at some point. There will be a transition of leadership. Yeah, it's inevitable.
No question. And as I said, it doesn't have to be an overwhelming process. As you point out, the solopreneur, that's probably a pretty easy, quick process, right? What you're trying to achieve, if you get clear on the goal of what you're trying to achieve, it probably is a pretty small group of folks that you want to talk to about what an opportunity looks like, that if something happens to you, they're there as a continuity for your clients, and they're to help monetize the business, if the worst occurs. But then it can be very complex as well, as you said. But it's generally going to be right-sized to the complexity of your business. So I wouldn't be, I spend a lot of time talking about it, and it can sound really complicated, but I think it can be pretty simple too.
Yeah. I think one of the things too is understanding that, to your point about goals and having those written down, right? Are you trying to create a durable organization that's going to well outlast you and not be sold, but, or not be sold to a third party and rolled up into a corporation? Or are you trying to create something else that is sold and you're primarily trying to get the highest multiple? Understanding the goals of what you want to achieve is so critical.
Definitely.
In the last episode I had on the Kick It Open podcast, we featured a woman named Stevie Green, and she is an advisor, family practice out of Kansas City area. They have grown from about 5 people to 15. They have done probably 5 or so M&A transactions, a lot of succession transactions. And one of the things that she talked about was that kind of shift up in her leadership. We talked about the coaching already, and it sounds as if you really kind of reimagined your leadership over the years. How are you asking your team to also reimagine theirs?
We think of things in terms of 3 to 5 and 10-year cycles. So we're regularly, at least once a year, revisiting those visions and those forecasts, and talking very openly about what resources are needed. We actually talk about what resources we need from a human capital perspective, from a team perspective on a quarterly basis. That's usually no longer than a 12-month cycle that we're looking out, or a 12-month time period. But it's something that we encourage our leaders to think about what that team is going to look like over the next 3 years, and make sure that we're building in a way that has durability. And durability has a couple different pieces. Number one, you want to make sure your team has capacity. We want to make sure that we've got great technology that is really helping ensure that we're driving efficiency. So we're not just hiring people to hire people, that if there's a way that we can make our current people more efficient and create the capacity that's needed, let's do that. And think about how we can approach things that way. But, ultimately, I go back to we're here to grow future leaders. And so as we continue to grow as an organization, all of our leaders, it's incumbent upon them to think about who's going to provide them the lift to grow in their leadership journey, and what skills do we need to look for and look to hire for to ensure that we have the highest likelihood and probability of success as the organization grows. So that's really the conversation. And again, our kind of cadence that we go through, we're talking about, as I said, the people side of the business quarterly. We have a full day off-site each quarter to kind of check in on how we're doing with that year's plan. And then once a year, we have a strategic planning offsite. That's 2 days where we spend more time talking about that 3 and 5 year time frame and what we think that looks like.
In the episode with Stevie Green, we also talked a lot about M&A. What role do you see M&A playing in PlanCorp's future?
To date, we really have not engaged much in the M&A side of the business. There's a few different reasons for that, but I'd say the number one is we've just been really focused on succession. And so we finished up Succession 1.0, as I've referred to it, at the end of 2021. And in 22, 23, we're building out a strategy for what M&A would look like from our perspective that made sense, that was differentiated. There's so many great acquirers out there today. You do, I think, have to ask yourself, what value is PlanCorp bringing to the table that isn't out there already? Because if it's already being met, if that need's already being met, then the question is, how are we going to win versus those people? How are we going to be successful in that campaign? And also, what are the needs of the business? And is there an intersection between those two things? And what we ultimately decided was that it made sense for us to look at certain acquisitions that are located in key markets where we can find people who really love the leadership and advice side of the business, but are starting to, they're ready to offload some of the administrative compliance, HR, even some of the back office things that they probably still do as a smaller firm. We have centralized trading. We have centralized financial planning. These are things that we can take a heavy lift off of the shoulders of some of those smaller but successful firms and really free up those folks to focus on their current clients, their future clients, and leading their teams, which are things that energize a number of folks, but they'd rather not get too hung up on how do I go out and recruit the next 3 people on the team? How do I train those people? How do I develop them? How do I retain them? What does all that look like? How do I build out the infrastructure for a succession plan of my own? PlanCorp already has a really well put together. Obviously, I'm biased, but I think, it's a well thought out plan that we've executed on. And we have a shareholder guide that we give to every employee that shows them this is the path to becoming a shareholder at PlanCorp. It's open to anybody. And so we're very clear on what that opportunity looks like and how you can get there. And we're always challenging ourselves to get incrementally better in terms of how do we give more opportunity to more people so that as we grow, our team has the opportunity to share in that success.
That's great. I love the transparency of that. One of the things I'll share is from my prior corporate days, we used to talk about 3 deep and what was the bench behind you and wanting you to have 3 deep in your succession line.
Yeah.
Do you guys use terminology like that or approaches like that?
I like that term. We don't. We do have this idea of succession thinking, which is every leader at the firm needs to think about, and I'll actually take a step back and just be very direct. We weren't great about this before COVID. But when COVID hit, one of the things we did early on was, look, if something were to happen to any one of us, who's taking over those responsibilities? Who sits in that seat? Whether it's my seat or somebody else's seat, that's a key leader in the organization. And so we're now going through the process of, okay, let's make sure that we're keeping that up to date each and every year. And let's also go farther down in the organization, because we have key leaders that don't sit on the leadership team throughout the organization, that we want to make sure we've got good durability and there's folks behind them who we're really pouring into them and focusing on their development so they're ready to step up if there's a need or just when there's an opportunity.
Yeah, and that all takes time, right? It takes time
Sure.
to lead those folks and to develop them. That's a capacity element as well. So I know that there's probably some forced, maybe overcapacity when you're thinking of such a long-term view.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, we have definitely taken our time together today, and more time than I even planned for. So I really appreciate you giving us this time. Just want to close with 5 really quick hit questions. I love this Vogue thing from the old days where they would follow a celebrity around and ask them questions as they looked at their home. So very quick hit kind of questions.
Oh,
here.
boy. Now I'm nervous. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I doubt it. All right. What's your favorite app on your phone right now?
Oh, wow. Favorite app on my phone right now. It's the Brightplan app. So
the wellness company, the financial wellness company.
Financial wellness. I can see all my finances there, track my expenses, set up a budget, see my subscriptions. And so I love the app.
That is pretty awesome. Can regular consumers get to that, or is it primarily through employers that Brightplan has a
You have to access
to
that through employers. So if your employer doesn't have it, you can certainly ask them and they could offer that as an employee benefit. Or PlanCorp clients also have access to that.
Sounds like a really cool thing.
Yeah.
What is one thing that you've always wanted to learn but haven't had the chance to yet?
Boy, that's a great question. I would say I would love to, this is going to be really odd and random. I would love to learn how to kind of record and mix some music. I've dabbled in music over the years, and a couple of my kids are into music, and I've always thought it would be cool to be able to help produce a song. So yeah.
You want to be like David Solomon and be a DJ?
No, not a DJ. No.
All right. New Year's resolutions. Are you going to have any?
No, I'm not a New Year's resolution guy. I'm a firm believer. I love atomic habits and that concept of, just constantly be focused on improving. And so that's my focus. And the new year doesn't change that. It's, stay in the constant improvement mode, and then nothing feels like a huge lift. Or very few things feel like a huge lift.
Got it. Well, and for the listeners, we're recording this before New Year's, but it will air after New Year's. Yeah. What is an AI tool that maybe you're really excited about right now?
Another great question. I was down at an industry event in New Zealand recently, and we had a demo of a platform called Contented AI, which was really fascinating. It's did an excellent job, the best I've seen yet, of taking an audio recording and parsing out notes, but also pulling together really excellent and usable summaries with different lenses to it, I guess I'd call it. So I'm probably doing a poor job of explaining it, but it even can give you a quick LinkedIn post from a conversation. So it was just very, very intuitive and easy to use. And so I was impressed with that, and we're looking to get that set up right now.
Oh, that's cool. I'm going to have to look into it because I do a lot of content, obviously, and that sounds like it could, Matt Halloran atomize the content for me pretty easily.
Yeah. The other one, I will say one more, Napkin AI.
Napkin?
The visualization tool that's out there, if you haven't used it, you can plug in notes or, summaries into this tool, and it will provide an array of visualizations that you can then use to populate a presentation. So. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Last question. What's a piece of leadership advice that you share with your team?
Oh, that's a great question. I I'll be a broken record, but I think it's just this idea of continuous improvement that, let's not spend our time thinking about monumental changes that we can make. Let's think about how we can get incrementally better each day, each week. And that's going to provide a huge uplift over time. Those decisions and those improvements compound. And that makes all the difference. And it's also much easier to manage.
Fantastic. Chris, this was a great time today. Thank you so much for your generosity in sitting down with me.
Thank you, Shelby. I really appreciate it.
This was fun. Have a great day.
You too.
See you all soon, listeners. Thanks for listening to the Kick It Open podcast. The Kick It Open podcast is hosted and developed by Muriel Network in partnership with Catalyst. Kick It Open is produced by Shelby Nicholl, edited by Aaron Sherman, graphic design by John Gallagher. If you found today's podcast valuable, please help us out by subscribing and sharing with your friends. Just click that little plus sign or the follow button wherever you get your podcasts.